and then there was an explosion over the camp.
Oh.
And about the time that sucker exploded, the gas alarm went off. And I will tell you, that is the fastest I have ever put on a gas mask in my entire life.
All right, we're rolling. Thanks for being here, brother.
I appreciate you having me.
Let's just start it out. Just why don't you tell us your name, branch of service you served in, your rank, and the years you served.
Yeah, my name is Joe Higgins, United States Army. I got out as an E4, and I was in active duty from 1994 to 2004.
Wow. All right, where were you born?
I was born in Evergreen Park on the south side of Chicago.
Okay, is that where you grew up?
Yes.
Would you talk to me a little bit about your upbringing?
Yeah, absolutely. My grandfather on my mother's side was in World War II in the Pacific Theater. My grandfather on my father's side was in the World War II on the Pacific Theater as well. My dad served in the National Guard, and I grew up as the oldest of 7 kids.
Wow, the oldest of 7, huh?
Yeah, it was a very busy household. There's only 10 years between myself and my baby brother. So there's not a lot of spread. 7 kids, 10 years.
Wow. Were you guys pretty close?
For the most part, growing up, we were close in as if you were an outsider, somebody, you know, down the street, friends, you couldn't pick on any one of us. But once you got into the house and the door shut, man, it was a battle royal pretty much all the time.
Yeah. Did you go to school out there?
Yes.
Where'd
Went
you go to
all
high
the way
school?
through high school. I went to Bloom Trail High School in Chicago Heights.
Did you do any sports when you were growing up? Any hobbies or anything?
I started in middle school. I played basketball, football, ran track, and cross country. Also, once I got into high school, started into drama. Was in a couple of plays, and I did some choir, a little bit of singing. I was actually at one point thinking about going to college on a music scholarship.
Wow. What inspired you to join the military?
I kind of wanted to follow after my grandfather. See, he was a World War II veteran who ended up becoming very active in the community and was a state senator in Illinois. Now, by the time I came along, he'd already did his 3 terms and was a lobbyist. But I just wanted to be like him, and I figured what better place to start than the Army.
Now, when you enlisted in the Army, did you have any job in mind?
I didn't. I had no clue what I was going to do. I had just graduated high school, just kind of trying to figure things out. Went to the Army recruiter and, you know, took the test. Luckily, I got a high enough score. My job just came to me at that point.
What job was that?
The Black Hawk crew chief.
Oh, nice.
Which is kind of ironic because at that point in my life, I had never been on an airplane.
Oh, really?
I had never left that area outside of a couple of car trips and a train trip to Washington State. So I had never set foot in the sky. Next thing you know, I'm picking a job that can send me up there all the time.
Wow.
So when I joined the military, I actually started off in the reserve.
Okay.
So after basic training and boot camp, I went back home, and my first duty station was actually Glenview Naval Air Station with a reserve unit. I don't know why I was kind of assigned to that one. I guess it was because the only aviation unit. But when I got there, all they had were Hueys and Cobras. So it was another one. I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? You guys don't have a Black Hawk. So you just kind of, for the entire weekend, we would watch Navy planes take off the runway and, you know, kick around here or there, sit on a Huey, but really not much of anything.
How long did you serve in the reserves before you decided?
I was there about 6 months. And my best friend from high school had joined the Army as well, but he went straight active duty. And he had come home for a weekend visit because his first duty station was Fort Campbell. And he's, man, you got to just come active duty. And he kept wearing on me. So I finally went to my reserve unit, said this is what I want to do. Went back to the recruiter, changed up, and went active duty with station of choice, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Which is not a bad station in that it was only 5.5-hour drive home.
Oh.
So I got to be relatively close while still being on active duty.
Okay. Now, when you go from reserve to active duty, I imagine you still get to keep your same MOS?
Yep, kept my same MOS, got to keep my rank. Everything was just kind of, here's your paperwork, off you go. I didn't even have to go back to MEPS.
Now
you just sign another contract. You got till this day to be there.
Then you're just active.
Yep.
How did you like active duty compared to reserve?
That was a culture shock. Everything in the reserves is kind of laid back. You know, you address people by their rank, but in certain situations at certain times, hey, Bill, how's it going, Bob? You know, that kind of thing. When you go to active duty, there's none of that whatsoever. So it took a little bit of adjustment. Also, at that point, outside of basic and AIT, that's my first time away from home. So didn't have a car at that point in time, kind of stuck in the barracks. It was, that was a little bit of a shock. Also, active duty military, you know, it's the barracks. So again, just kind of looking around going, really, I just signed up for this. A little bit of second guessing at that point.
Did you give your buddy a call after that? Like, hey, man.
No, he came to pick me up. He was married by then. He actually married a girl I dated in high school. So they were living off post in an apartment. He came and picked me up, and I just about slapped him upside his head and asked him what the hell he was doing here. Oh,
wow. Yo, you weren't expecting him?
I wasn't expecting the shock and, you know, the adjustment.
Yeah.
It was definitely a difficult adjustment for me. Once you make it through your maintenance time and you start to get a little bit of experience under your belt, that's when they start looking at you to go to what they call a flight platoon. That's where they teach you to actually be a crew chief on the aircraft while you're flying around, part of the crew. So I hadn't been moved over to the flight company for just a couple weeks, and we got a formation called. And it was a formation to award air medals to several of our crew chiefs and pilots who were actually in Somalia. And I remember sitting at that formation going, man, that's really cool. I don't want to, I want to stay in the military till I can get one of those, not knowing what that meant. I just thought it was the greatest thing in the world right there, though, watching them get an air medal for, you know, something they done flying.
Right.
It made a huge impression on me. Just made me want to work harder.
Do you recall when you realized what that meant? Them, you know?
Yes, I absolutely remember what that. It was in 2003 as we were getting ready to go into Iraq. Or I'm sorry, that was 2000 and. Yeah, it was 2003. Yeah. So we were sitting there in Kuwait at one of the forward operating bases that they had set up for aircraft. And they came to us and said, look, we need 2 crews. You guys are going to go across into Iraq and run a mission, what they call a Wet Hawk. We use a Black Hawk to refuel OH-58s at the time. What they were doing was they were sending these OH-58s across the border, clearing routes that everybody was going to take in a few days. So I volunteered. I was one of the higher time guys at that point, one of the most experienced. So I threw my hand up and said, yeah, I want to do this. 2 aircraft go out, and it was a day before the invasion started. And we were just south of Nasiriyah, as a matter of fact, sitting on the ground, completely exposed. And I'm just like, I guess this is what it means to get one of those. There's nobody behind us. There's nobody in front of us. If something happens, we're on our own, except for a small contingent of infantry that they gave us to, you know, kind of just protect our perimeter. It was us. And we were waiting at these different locations for the OH-58s, who can't carry a full load of fuel with rockets and bullets on board. So they would show up to us, their refuel guys would hook our aircraft up to theirs, give them enough fuel to make the next move, whatever they were doing, and then we would reposition. And we did that as far north as whatever objective they were at, and then we all hauled tail back to Kuwait that night.
Wow. Did it feel like you were in, you know, a combat environment when you were doing that?
it didn't feel like a combat environment, but it felt like it could be.
Right.
You know, like I said, there was nobody behind us. The war didn't start till the next day. So if something happens, we're kind of on our own at that point.
Yeah.
And you can see the town in the distance. We had one of the pilots up on top of the aircraft with binoculars, making sure that nobody was heading out toward us. So you just, at that point, just kind of waiting. To me, it wasn't a question of if, it was when.
Yeah.
And we got lucky on that mission.
Did you go back out the next day during the invasion day?
On the invasion day, we actually stayed behind one day. So they let all of the ground forces, everybody started to roll across the border. We waited a day for them to clear up to a certain point, and then we jumped in behind them. And that's how it just kept advancing. They would keep moving forward, and as they got to a certain point, we would pack up and move to the next one. Because you never want your aviation assets out in front of everybody else.
Right. And what was that like? Supporting the ground troops like that, on that, the day after invasion. What was going through your mind?
Man, it was just, listening to some of the radios, running resupplies. They were just moving so fast. So, we're trying to resupply them with everything that they can, and actually most of our missions came from casualty evacuation. Turns out, once they gave us the information, we thought it would be friendlies that we needed to evac to a hospital, and it wasn't. It was Iraqis that needed to be evacuated back to a hospital, whether they were injured by us or some of them had actually been shot by Saddam's Fedayeen as they were trying to retreat as we were coming. So we were just taking load after load after load of Iraqis back to the hospitals.
Wow. That's interesting.
It was, and that was where it's fear, but it's not, because you're trained for it and you're ready to go. But as they're loading these guys in the aircraft, they're supposed to, the area that we pick them up from, the casualty collection point, is supposed to provide a guard, and they didn't have enough people to provide a guard. So I've got the back of a Black Hawk stripped out of seats, a bunch of Iraqis back there. We're assuming they've been patted down. I didn't do it. But there's the row of crew chiefs and then the pilots. So I've got 8 or 9 of these guys back there, and the only thing between them and the pilots bringing us down is me. So you've got one eye on your weapon out the door with your hand on that, and I set my 9mm on my lap just in case. So I've got one eye over here and one eye out there, because I don't want them coming forward and heading for my pilots.
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially you could have been loading up, like they could have plotted that, right? They could just be loading up and saying, we're gonna take this Black Hawk out.
Couple people, yeah. I mean, they could have given themselves a leg shot or something like that, because they weren't so critically injured. They were out. I mean, most of these guys were able to walk in, and there was a couple of litters back there, but most of those guys walked in under escort, sat down in the back of the aircraft.
Wow. Did anybody, I'm curious, was anybody upset that you guys were doing that? Because not that you were helping Iraqis, but because of the danger it presented on you guys.
Not really. It was people that needed to get back to help.
Yeah.
We don't know if they'd been fighting with us. We don't know that maybe they were Bedouins out there that just got caught in a crossfire. We never knew.
Wow.
At this point, you got these guys, you got to get them back to that point and get back over here. And it was just run after run after run. Whatever we can do. And then when you weren't running that, you were running MREs and water and ammo up to the front, just keeping the guys resupplied.
How long were you out there flying missions?
We were flying missions every day.
Every single day? Like were you out there for 6 months?
We left in, we rolled across the border in March, got to Baghdad Airport on, was it April 6th, I want to say? That was interesting. As we got to Baghdad Airport, they still had tanks clearing the airport. So there were tanks going in between the rows of aircraft through the airport. I remember seeing just outside of the airport, there was an A-10 that got shot down. And, you know, they were yelling, somebody get spooled up. Let's go get that pilot back. And we got all the way up and we were ready to go. Luckily, the infantry on the ground had got to him first, so we didn't have to go. But the very first person that I saw at Baghdad Airport was Ted Koppel. Before I saw any generals, any other troops, anything like that, it was Ted Koppel standing there broadcasting from the airport. Just not something you expect to see.
Wow. I know as part of the invasion, you know, a lot of units were fully mopped up, mop suits, right?
Yeah.
How does that work being in a Black Hawk? Do you?
They had special suits for us that fit under our Nomex flight suits for mop gear, and then you had a normal set of mop gear for while you were on the ground.
Right.
A case in point being, about 2 days before the mission I just told you about, we were sitting on the airfield, a little strip that they had, a couple of clamshell hangars. It was at night, all of our stuff was done, so we were sitting in there just kind of hanging out, playing spades. And at one point I had decided, me and a couple of other guys decided to take a smoke break. So we walked out of the little clamshell hangar. We could still hear the music going inside, everybody just kind of relaxing. And I'm standing there at night, smoking, looking at the night sky. All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, a Patriot missile battery goes off. And then there's an explosion over the camp. Oh. And about the time that sucker exploded, the gas alarm went off. And I will tell you, that is the fastest I have ever put on a gas mask in my entire life. Faster than any kind of training, faster than the gas cage, the NBC chamber. I mean, it was quick.
Yeah.
And then at that point, once you get your mask on, we had to sprint into the clamshell where we had our suits so that we could get those on, gloves, boots, the whole 9 yards. And now we're standing there just like, what in the world is going on right now? You don't expect that. About 10 minutes later, the all clear sounds. What it was a British jet coming back from a bombing run in Iraq. Did not have his friend or foe identifier plugged in correctly, so the Patriot missile battery misidentified him and shot him down over our camp.
Oh, wow. So a friendly fire, essentially.
Yes.
And what was the outcome for those pilots? Not good.
Didn't even have a chance to eject.
Oh, that's rough. That's rough for everybody. It's rough for the person that had it.
Yeah. I don't know where the guy was supposed to get his information from. We never heard anything about it after that, other than the fact that it was a British jet that we had just taken out because he didn't have the correct frequency in his radio.
Wow.
Because at that point, airspace was tightly controlled. AWACS up above, all the guys on the ground. I mean, it was very tightly controlled airspace because you're talking about shock and awe.
Did you guys do a lot of training in your gas masks, mopped up and stuff? Like,
not really.
No.
You do your once a year qualifications in the aircraft. We had to go through aerial gunnery once a year. And part of our aerial gunnery was donning the gas mask and shooting. Same thing with our sidearm was 9mm. You go through and you holster your 9mm, put on your mask, and then you go back to firing. That was really outside of, common core tasks for soldiers. That's about the only time we really trained it.
So what was it like? Most people don't understand what it's like trying to get things done with a gas mask on. And, you talked about, putting your gas mask on the fastest you've ever done it. What was it like trying to get all your shit together and, just with that on?
I really don't know. At that point, when you see something like that, instinct, that quick. It was get that mask on, get into the building, and get into these clothes as fast as I possibly can. And it's weird because we were just kind of teasing each other a couple of days before as, as everybody started to come in and they started talking about, look, you know, he's got scuds, he's got weapons of mass destruction, the whole 9 yards. So they're building it up, that this is a possibility. You could run into this. Make sure that all of our atropine injectors were good. And one of the tasks, in case you don't have one of the kits that detects the different chemicals and or things like that, is you take the lowest ranking soldier, remove his weapon from him, and make him take his mask off. And it unseals the mask, take a couple of deep breaths, seals it. If they fall down and they do the kicking chicken, if you will, area's not clear.
Wow.
And we were kind of teasing each other about it the day before. Me and another guy were walking around going, hey man, can I hold your weapon? And the guy goes, hey, yeah, here. That's our guy. And next thing you know, we could possibly be in the middle of a chemical attack.
Wow. Wow.
Because you don't know. You know, all you see is it's dark. We never saw the jet. All we saw was the Patriot missiles go off. So you don't know.
Yeah.
And at that point, you definitely treat it like it is the real deal.
Wow.
We just got lucky it wasn't.
Wow. How many missions? How many missions would you say you guys conducted during that span?
Well, we were flying every day, so probably 40 to 50 easily.
Yeah.
Because once we got to Baghdad Airport, our mission went from resupply to it turned into flying generals around and battalion commanders. So what they did on the push forward, if a vehicle broke down and they couldn't get a record to it, they would leave the equipment right there, take a GPS position, and everybody kept going because they didn't want to slow everybody down. So we spent several missions, several hours a day flying battalion and brigade commanders around looking for their equipment.
Wow.
We would run missions at night where the PSYOPs guys would give us boxes of leaflets, and we would run all the way up 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet, make a couple circles around the city and kick out boxes of leaflets, dropping over them. Hey, the Americans are here. We're not here to hurt you. You know, things like that.
Yeah.
And then we actually ran a couple of the missions where they've got the external fuel tanks on a Black Hawk, but they actually have, instead of fuel, they have speakers in there. So they play nice, loud, heavy metal music as you're flying around to kind of throw everybody off. And I got to run a couple of those missions. That was kind of neat.
Did you ever take fire while you're doing these missions?
A couple of times, and then we had a couple of scares.
Yeah.
I remember the very first time pilot started yelling that he was taking fire from 3 o'clock, I want to say. So he goes into a bank, starts doing his thing. I've got my gun out, I'm looking, and one of the pilots in the aircraft behind us started chuckling. What he had seen out the corner of his eye was some stars that reflected off of the Euphrates, and it threw him for a loop. So wow. You got a couple of scares, and then you got a couple that actually do happen. Most of the time that we were taking fire was at night, so they could hear us, but they couldn't see us, so it wasn't that close.
Right. What was it like transitioning back into civilian life for you?
The initial transition was actually relatively easy. So I signed out on terminal leave Christmas Eve 2003. During my terminal leave, which was from Christmas Eve to January 30th, I was able to get myself as a job as a contractor on Hunter, doing the same thing I did in the Army. So once I got back, New Year's rolls around, I was still on terminal leave, and it was my first day on the job. I was going right back into the hangar that I just left a couple weeks ago, but pushing my toolbox and in a different uniform. It did make that transition a little bit easier. A lot of the money was better, and I was doing the exact same thing that I just finished doing. So I got lucky in that regard.
Were there any aspects of it that you missed? You know, and I ask this question because a common thing I see amongst veterans is trying to find that camaraderie that was built up during your service.
Yeah, initially no, because I was working in the same hangar with the guys I was stationed and deployed with. So I worked as a contractor for, I want to say it was 3.5 years. So for 3.5 years, yeah, some of those guys would deploy, but there were still a lot of them there. And you're working with guys who were all prior service military as well. So that camaraderie was there. It was an easy time.
Right.
It was after we went through, when you're a contractor like that, they give that contract such a certain amount of money for a 6-month, 12-month period of time. So they get down to a certain level, and all of a sudden they start looking around going, well, we're almost going to run out of money, so what we need to do is a RIF first. So they start laying people off for a couple, 2-3 weeks at a time, and then they'll bring them back. So after I want to say it was my 5th or 6th time being on the layoff list, I was like, you know what, man, I've got a family. It's time for me to move on and find something else, because I can't, every 6 months having to face this, I just can't do it.
Right.
So that's when I transitioned, if you will, into civilian life. Is I started looking for a job outside of the military.
And so what was that like when you got to that point?
That's where it started to get interesting, because now it's like, okay, the aviation's all I've ever done. Gulfstream wasn't really hiring, so what am I going to do? Where can I go? Where can I fit in? And I ended up getting into big trucks, working at a tire shop in Pooler. Just kind of learning an entirely new industry, and trying to figure it out as I go. And it's at that point, you kind of start to miss the camaraderie, but I was so busy at that point in time with family. I was trying to make up for lost time with my son, so I was coaching basketball and coaching football, and it was, you know, a go, go, go. School, sports, stuff like that, work, straight to bed. And then repeat, rinse every day, the same cycle. So I kind of used that as a workaround, if you will, to missing everything. I just stayed so busy that I didn't have time to miss it.
Did there ever come a point where you did have some time to think about it?
It was after my second child, my son, graduated high school. He graduated, and within 2 weeks, he went off to college. And it was at that point, now what do I do? Now I'm completely lost. My identity was, I was a soldier, I was a crew chief for 10 years. And then my identity became dad coach. And I did that all the way up to 2016. And now, what do I do? I've got no hobbies. I don't do anything other than dad coach. So I was completely lost. I just didn't know what I was going to do at that point, other than, you know, go to work every day.
Yeah. How did that make you feel, man? Did you were you anxious, anxiety, depression, any types of emotions?
Yeah, that's when I really noticed the anxiety and the depression and stuff like that. At that point, I was in a job. I'd switched jobs several times during that because, you know, in the civilian world, they're going to let you go at the drop of a hat. So I was on my 3rd or 4th different civilian job at that point, and I absolutely hated it. I hated everything about that job, but it paid the bills, it took care of my kid, you know, insurance, the whole 9 yards. I sucked it up. And that's when he's off, he's gone. It was like, man, I don't have anything else. I don't have hobbies, you know. All of my friends had PCS by then. The friends that I did have, some of their kids were still in school, and I wasn't going to those events because it felt weird with my kid graduating, you know, showing up to that kind of stuff. So I'd be more anxious, but I spent a lot of time just straight up depressed. Just, you know, barely get up in the morning and go to work. As soon as I came home, just lay on the couch and crash. Not want to move. Just wasn't me anymore. I had no energy.
Did you ever talk to anybody about it?
I didn't.
Why
I
not?
didn't know who to talk to.
Yeah.
I wasn't plugged into anything outside of, school. I didn't know what resources were available, and I didn't equate it one to the other at that point in time. I just blamed it on the job and blamed it on being bored because I didn't know what to do. So just kind of muddle through.
Yeah.
At that point, luckily for me, before I had a chance to quit, that job let me go and I found another one. It kind of started to change at that point. I didn't hate my job, so it wasn't as bad. But that's when one of the guys that I worked with was like, hey man, why don't you come out to this? Why don't you come out to that? I'd tell him I got too much to do, but too much to do being I'm gonna go home and sit on my butt and do nothing.
Right.
And he just kept at me, and he kept at me. And I finally gave in. I was like, fine, man, I'll go to a barbecue or something like that. And that's when I started meeting up with veterans and seeing, hey, maybe there is a problem.
And then what happened after that? Did you start getting involved more in the veteran community again?
A little bit at a time. I dipped my toe in and I joined one organization and I just kind of hid in the back, didn't do anything. But I started, going to different events and seeing different things. Just kind of gave me something else to do. And then that led to, volunteering for something else. And then volunteering for something else. And then I want to describe it as a high. It was definitely a fix. What it did was it gave me something to do. And I started thriving on that. Like, if I stay busy, I won't feel like this. If I stay busy, this won't happen. So I just started making myself busy again. But all you're doing is masking it at that point. It's like taking a drug. You're not dealing with it, you're just getting around it.
That's right. I never looked at it like that. It's the same thing as taking a drug, right? You're just, just avoiding it.
Yeah, that's all it is. And, you blame it on whatever you want. Oh, I'm too busy. I've got this event. I got this. I'm going over here. I'm going over there. But it's avoidance.
Yeah.
And you eventually get to that point where you need that avoidance so much. It's just like taking a drug. All of a sudden you get a week or two where you don't have an event. You're sitting around like, that's, what am I doing? Just kind of looking around.
Did you ever go seek help, like through the VA or anything?
I finally started going to my civilian doctor. I was like, look, man, I've got this going on. And most of it was the anxiety. It was always feeling like somebody's watching me, or crowded spaces. Even meetings in the veteran community where there's a whole bunch of people, and you get those points in time where everything just kind of feels like it's closing in on you. So, I initially went to, hey man, give me something for this. Not until you go talk to this guy over here. All right, fine. So grudgingly, I went over there and I started talking to, and that's when talking to that therapist is when I figured out what I was doing. I was using the sports and being a dad and the different obligations that I was committing myself to in the veterans community. I was using that as an escape. I was using it as a chance to not face, just what I was dealing with.
And did the therapist give you any advice on how to get over that, like how to deal with it?
They did. It's just working through it every day. Waking up in the morning knowing that, all right, it's going to be a rough day. Somebody's going to piss you off. Trying to work around that and knowing now, okay, as I'm starting to overload myself, the reason I'm at this point in time, maybe this week I'm adding a couple of things over here, is because I'm not doing well and I need to slow down, go to the gym, do something like that to clear my head and to kind of calm myself down. Just kind of work through it, acknowledge that, sometimes you're not all right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as well as I do, it's not you know, it's a common thing in the veteran community, you know, not to talk about these things, right? 'Cause,
Yeah.
you know, they're perceived as you being a little weak because, you know, you say some shit like that when you're in the service, they're gonna tell you to kick rocks, right?
Yeah,
Like,
they'll make fun of you.
right. But obviously it's a huge problem, you know, given the, you know, I don't know what the number is now, but, you know, it was 22 vets a day committing suicide.
Yeah.
Right? Which is pretty ridiculous.
It's too many.
Yeah.
One is too many.
Right? So, you know, this is one of the reasons why we're doing this project right here to show, you know, that, hey, it's okay to sit down and talk about this stuff. It doesn't make you no less of a person. It just says, hey, I did this, and this is what we deal with, and that's that. You know what I mean? And this is how you could make it feel better. You know, no more, no less. So
It's funny, some of my, while combat in Iraq was traumatic, that actually wasn't the most traumatic thing I ever experienced in the military.
Oh, really?
It really wasn't.
What was?
So after I left Fort Campbell, I got myself PCS'd. I re-enlisted to go to Fort Lewis, Washington. I always wanted to be over that side. I get to Fort Lewis, and the only active duty aviation they have there is the medevac. It was the medevac and then a few National Guard Chinooks off to the side. So I get there, I've got flight experience, I go straight into flying. Get me up. It was 1 or 2 check rides just to make sure that I was good. Teach me the rescue hoist, and then I was off. And at that point in time, from 98 to 2000, Fort Lewis, their medevac, had what they called the Military Assistance to Safety in Traffic, or MAST mission. And we would get calls from the sheriff's office, mountain rescue, things like that. If you've ever been to Washington, you've got the coast and the ocean on one side, the mountain range. Then you get to the middle of the state and it's desert. Mm-hmm. Then you get to the other side of the state and there's more mountains. So we had, between Fort Lewis itself and the Yakima Training Center, where we kept a crew for a week at a time, statewide coverage for civilians. So lost mountain climbers, car wrecks in the passes, they would call us, and we would go out and work the missions. That was actually, to me, more traumatic because it was real world, and I was seeing way more injuries and stuff like that than I did in combat. In aviation, we don't get the level of trauma, if you will, that the infantry gets to see on the ground. Mm-hmm. Most of ours is from the air. Mm-hmm. But this one, we were up close and personal with it. And I mean, you'd show up for a duty day, the first part of the morning, you prep the aircraft, get everything ready to go, and then you kind of work it like a normal duty day. But at any time, any 24-hour shift that we would get, 1 to 2 missions a day is what we would average.
Wow.
And man, some of those were rough. Depending on the level of what was going on, once we left Fort Lewis, we would fly to Seattle to pick up a doctor. If we knew something was not going to be good, because our medics on board didn't have the capability to pronounce somebody. So if you get to a scene, crash, something like that, if you don't have that capability with you, you have to work that person all the way till you get to the hospital. So it's easier to pick up a doctor to, you know, that way, as harsh as that sounds, that way we don't have to work on somebody who's just not going to make it. And there were several of those. Some teenage kid that was on top of a waterfall taking pictures, slipped and fell. It wasn't one of those where we picked up a doctor. So, I mean, you can clearly see once we got him into the aircraft, and it was another rescue hoist mission where I've got to put my medic down 200 feet. He, you know, sends up for a basket. I send the basket down. The first thing I get up is the patient, and then I bring the medic back in, and you know, we proceed to try and work on this guy. But you can see from the way his neck is shaped, nothing we're doing is going to help. but you can't stop at that point.
Wow.
So that was actually, some of those were way more difficult.
Yeah, I bet, man. That's rough.
That 2 years was actually some of the most fulfilling time I had in the Army.
Really?
At Fort Campbell with the 101st, early 90s, you know. It was after Somalia, after Desert Storm. The only thing we would do is you go to the field for 1 month, you spend 1 month on 2-hour recall, and then you go and leave for a month. So we would fly missions, essentially just picking guys up, flying them to different areas of Fort Campbell and dropping them off. Training. You know, while it's fun and can be fun, it's not as rewarding, okay? Get to Fort Lewis, and I spend that time, you know, when you would hear that buzzer go off in the hangar, man, you knew it was on. You knew somebody needed you and you had to go. And it's purpose. That's what we train for, you know? That's purpose. And then I get to Savannah, and I was here for a month before we deployed to Bosnia, and that was all VIP, flying the generals around to different camps and stuff like that. So you're gone for an entire 9 hours and get an hour's worth of flight time or 2 hours worth of flight time, because it's all just sitting there waiting on these guys to do their thing and come back. Just boredom.
Right.
It's pure boredom. And then, of course, you know, Iraq is an entirely different animal. I mean, there's purpose and there's mission there. But it wasn't the same, you know?
Yeah. Wow. You want to talk about anything that you're involved in now? Obviously, you're involved in, you know, deeply involved in the American Legion here, right, in Savannah, Georgia?
So, yeah. I still use the veterans community as a crutch.
Yeah.
But I also see a purpose to it now. It's not a purpose that I saw initially. You look at the American Legions and the VFWs, and their membership is getting older. Career vets, Vietnam vets, man, these guys are getting up to the point where they're ready to step out. And I noticed that there's a void coming in there. There's not a lot of younger vets like myself that are getting involved in this. So as I started to look around and see that, I was like, you know what? You know, I'll do that. I'll volunteer for this. I'll go over there and help you out, do this. And next thing you know, man, I'm chairman of the Veterans Council. I run an American Legion post. I'm in the VFW, the Sons of the American Legion. And it just kind of snowballed from there, where I think I'm up to 7 or 8 different organizations I'm a member of now.
Wow.
So I still use it as a crutch to, you know, not think about things, but I also use it as a way of saying, hey, these organizations are good, they help us.
Yeah.
And I need younger veterans to come out and help me. So are you familiar with the Legion Act, what that did recently as far as disabled veterans?
I'm not.
So a couple of years ago, they came out with the American Legion Act, where if you go to the VA and you get that disability card now, doesn't matter if it's 0 to 100, as long as it says service connected, you can now use on-base privileges for veterans that aren't retired. So you can go back to your PX, your commissary, the MWR, and things of that nature with that card.
Wow.
So you kind of get that back in your favor.
Yeah.
And that was I was the American Legion that went out and fought for that.
Nice.
They went up there to Congress and lobbied and lobbied and lobbied for it, and there you are. Same thing now with they're starting to process claims for Gulf War syndrome for Iraq vets. Air hazards from the burn pits and things like that. That's the Legion fighting for that. They have a huge voice up there in Congress.
Well, the American Legion is the biggest veteran organization in the world, right? Is that right?
Congressionally chartered, yes. It's the largest one in the world.
Wow. You know what? I knew about that, the ID card and the base privilege and stuff like that, but I had no idea it was the American Legion that fought for that. That's awesome to know.
Yep.
Wow.
They're out there. They were the ones that fought for the Agent Orange for the Vietnam veterans, getting these guys their disability for that. That's kind of what
awesome.
they're about. Is they spend all their time and effort is geared toward getting this stuff through Congress and getting the VA to recognize different things like that. And it's nice that they have that voice in Congress.
Awesome, man. That's great. Well, it's almost been an hour already, man. It flies by, huh?
It does. It goes quick.
Yeah. But, you know, so we'll wrap it up. But before we cut the tape, I just want to make sure, you know, if there's anything else you'd like to say before we wrap it up and cut it, anything specific.
No, man. I want the younger guys to know that, you know, these organizations, your American Legion, your VFWs, it's not just a bunch of old guys sitting at the bar talking about war stories. It's not just a bunch of old guys that want to complain. Okay, no organization is perfect. No unit is perfect in the military. You got one or two that are like that. But, man, we need you guys. We need these younger veterans to help out, to keep this stuff going, because that's where we're getting our rights from. That's where we're getting the VA to listen to us. You know, the VA is not going to listen to me or you, but you get a congressionally chartered organization out there that takes their delegation up there to Congress. They listen to that, and that's what we need. We need to fight for better care for the mental aspect that we're all dealing with. You know, the Vietnam vets, most of them did a year, maybe 2 deployments, and then you've got some that did 3 tours.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the post 9/11 vets between Iraq and Afghanistan, some of these guys are racking up 5 and 6 years deployed. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different ballgame right there. Yeah. That's a level of mental health that even the Vietnam vets haven't hit yet.
Yeah.
And we need to fight for that. We need the VA to take this up and do better.
Right.
They're trying, but they need to do better.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. 100%. 100%. I've interviewed some guys that did have like 9 tours, 6 tours, 7 tours.
It's not unheard of in our generation. That's not unheard of.
Yeah.
You know, it was unheard of to hit 3 or 4 in the Vietnam generation.
Yeah.
7, 8, 9, 10. It's not unheard of.
Wow. And then be expected to come back and transition out and act whatever normal is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Wow.
Exactly.
Well, hey, thank you for your service. And thank you for being here, man. I think it's amazing everything you're doing. You know what I mean? It's awesome that you're involved. And I know you say you use it as a crutch to stay busy, but you're also serving a gigantic purpose, man. Everything that you're doing has a humongous purpose in it. So yeah. I just want you to know that we at Urban Valor, we appreciate you and we thank you. Thank you for your service, brother.
We thank you guys for shedding a light on all of us.
Awesome. Thanks.
Push it to the limit, I can't go no more. Red light, no